Namaste and welcome to episode 4 or 4th. Namaste. Welcome to 4th episode of Flutter State Management Hero series. Up until now, we have set up our application, we have even developed our own API, deployed it to the Heroku, and we have set up our application to load different categories and questions from our API. Now, if we look at the code, for example, if we look at the categories page, in order to get a list of categories, we are creating an instance of API service. Again, if we look at the quiz options dialog, again here we are creating another instance of API service. We could, however, simply create a singleton pattern for this API service. If you do not know what singleton is, please check out my tutorial on singleton with Dart. So we could create a singleton. However, if we use a state management solution like Riverpod or even Get It, they give us options to share static or single values that we can use to share the single instance of these kind of services across our application. Also, every time we pass data we go from one route to another, we are passing this complex view model into our view that we have to create separately and pass it as argument to each of our pages. You can see this is passed in quiz options dialog. Again, when our quiz completes in quiz page, when we finish our quiz, again we are passing some similar data to our quiz summary page and so on. So this is tiresome. Repeating this kind of process, sharing data from one page to another, passing it as arguments during navigation, it is tiresome. So state management provide us with a better solution, and we will continue on now to integrate Riverpod in our application to make our application look cleaner, code manageable, and share data across our application easily. For that, first we'll install Flutter Riverpod. It's at 0.12.1 version, and we should run Flutter pub get, or it should run automatically. Now in main.dart, the very first thing we need to do is we need to wrap our root widget with our provider scope that comes from Flutter Riverpod. Okay, this provider scope comes from Flutter Riverpod. Once we wrap our application with provider scope, we can use providers or various providers from Riverpod in our application. So let us create our application state. Inside core, in presentation, let's create appstate.dart file. Okay, here we will start by learning the very first type of provider that Riverpod provides. Riverpod provides us with different types of provider, and the simplest of them is a provider that is used to provide some values that does not change during runtime. So let us begin. First, we'll learn how to declare a provider. Then we'll learn how we can access those provider in our widgets. So import Flutter Riverpod. We'll import Flutter Riverpod. Then we will declare our simplest of provider, that is final API service equals provider, and here provider we get a function that gives us a provider reference, which we'll not be using right now. We'll see later how we can use this provider reference, and this we simply return new instance of API service. So this is simply how we can declare a simplest of provider. We can use this provider to provide any values that do not change. For example, we could provide, say, Kathmandu. So we could access this location anywhere inside our application. Now that we declared our provider here, we can access it anywhere. Let us now move to categories page, and instead of using this new instance of API service, here we will read this provider. And as this simple provider, this does not change, we do not need to watch for changes in order to rebuild. So we can simply use context.read, and in order to use that, we need to import Riverpod again here. Once we import Riverpod, we can use, in order to read the provider, we can use context.read, and here we provide API service, that is the name of our provider, API service dot get categories. Now we can call the function in our API service. Okay, we need to hot restart. Now if we go to play now, our categories should be loaded. Okay, so this is how simple it is. Let's update this in our options dialog as well, where we are getting API service dot get questions. So first import Riverpod, Riverpod, then instead of this new instance, we can simply await context.read API service dot get questions. So it should work in the similar way as before. So it's still working. So this is using the first very simplest provider, only reading. We are not watching anything because the value does not change. Next, one problem that we can see here is every time we press play now, we are making an API request and loading these categories. However, what we could do is we could keep this list of categories in application state so that it is loaded only once, and then next time we press the play now button, it should automatically load from the application state without making the API request. And for that, for these kind of features, Riverpod provides us with FutureProvider. Now we'll see how to use that. First, we'll learn to declare. So final categories provider equals, so it's FutureProvider. FutureProvider, again we'll get a ref here, and this should return a future. However, in order to get our categories, we first need this API service, and this is where this ref comes in handy, this provider reference. Using this reference, we can access other providers that we have declared. So here I can simply return ref dot read. Again, we do not need to watch because API service is not going to change. So we simply read API service dot get categories and we return this. So this FutureProvider will simply get the categories and save it in a state, and this requires a type declaration. Let us declare it's a list of category. Okay, now we have our FutureProvider. Now how do we use this? Let's go back to our categories page. Here, instead of future builder, what we will use is, first we need to watch our future provider. So for that, let us learn another method how we can use consumer widget to watch different providers. So for that, we will change this stateless widget to consumer widget that is given to us by Riverpod. And once we change this to consumer widget, in our build method, we not only get build context but also scope reader watch. So this watch function, using this watch function, what we could do is categories future equals watch so what is the name, categories provider. We could watch this, and here instead of future builder we could simply use future dot when. So this when function has three different methods. First is loading, and when it is loading we can simply return circular progress indicator. And error state, when there is error we get error and stack trace of error. We could simply return for now we just show error. And finally, when there is data we get list of categories as data, and here we can return our list view. So here we'll return the list view builder. We no longer need these. Okay, and here we will return this list view dot builder, and this should work exactly the same. However, let's hot restart. First it is loading, we get the list of categories as before, but now to view the change, if we go back and tap the play now, this is instant because it is already loaded in the application state. We are no longer making another API request. We can simply access it from the application state. So this is instantaneous. So this is how we can use FutureProvider, and we saw another method of reading a value inside a provider. We could use consumer widget and watch. Now we will continue on and make some changes so that it is, so we'll learn some other providers, and one of which the important provider is a state provider. We'll see that in our quiz options dialog. So this quiz options dialog is a stateful widget, and for any stateful widget we could simply replace it with a stateless widget and a combination of Riverpod state provider. So let's change this stateless widget, and let's remove these state. Okay, and let's comment out these things. Now what we can do is we could create a state provider. So how to declare a state provider? Let's say final number of questions provider equals state provider. Okay, here again we get ref, and initially number of questions default value is 10 if we see in the init state. So we use the same, and we duplicate these for processing and practice mode as well. So let's duplicate, let's make this processing provider, and let's make this practice mode provider. So this is default value, practice mode is false, processing is false. So we now have all the state variables as a provider. So we can remove these. Now, another way to access these values, instead of turning this into consumer widget, what we could do is we could, let's make this not widget.category, rather category. What we could do is we could use another widget called consumer. So let's get down here. So here we need number of questions and we need it multiple times. So let us wrap this whole column widget. Let us wrap this widget with consumer. Okay, and this consumer widget gives us a builder. This builder gives context and watch. So this should give context, and let's see. So this should give a builder, function build context, provider base object. Okay, and this should return, instead of this child, we could simply return this. The argument of type column function build context can't be assigned to parameter type widget. So okay, this has 3 parameters, also child, and let's convert this to block body because we need to use this watch to watch certain things. So convert to block body, and let us watch first number of questions. So here, so in order to read stateful widgets or state provider, we need to watch it because state provider value changes. So here number of questions equals watch number of questions provider dot state. So we need to read the state from number of questions provider. So we now have these working because we are watching this. However, while selecting number of questions, instead of doing set state, what we need to do is we need to context dot read. So for this we need to pass here build context as well, context, and here we can read context dot read number of questions provider dot state equals I. So in order to update the state provider value of state provider, we simply reassign new value into state. We read the state provider and then in state we assign new value. This will update the state and trigger rebuild of any widgets that is watching this provider. Now let us go above and let's fix these things here. This should pass in context and number. Okay, now let us watch processing and other values similarly. So here in the watch, let's watch equals watch processing provider dot state. I think this is also underscored, and finally practice mode provider dot state. So most of the errors should be gone, And while updating practice mode, again we do the same way. Context.read practice mode provider dot state equals val. We update the state with the new value, and let's see, consumer single child scroll view. I think one is extra here. Okay, we fix that, and here this needs context. Let's fix that. And again, this number of question is read. Number of questions provider dot state, not vz dot category, simply category. And again, this practice mode should be read practice mode provider. Okay, dot state. So almost all the errors are gone. Here we need to pass in the context. Okay, so we have successfully replaced stateful vz with state provider, and the syntax looks a lot cleaner. We are simply using one consumer, or we could simply turn this stateless vz into consumer vz. This would make it even cleaner without these builder functions. However, for the sake of understanding the different methods that we can use to watch and read providers, I'm using this consumer here. So if we try now, quiz options dialog should work the same way as before. See, it's changing, and it's changing as well. So if I start the quiz, it should start the quiz with proper functionalities. So this is all for this episode, and in the next episode we will continue on using state provider and make some more changes, like we will remove all these view models that we are using to transfer data from one page to another during navigation, so that we could use simply a provider to pass these functionalities instead of passing as a parameter in each and every page, so that our pages like this quiz page will look much cleaner, will not have these view models, will not have to pass any data, will simply read all the required data from our state. And one more thing I'd like to show you before concluding this is that you might say, for example, if we check the app state, we are declaring a global variable, and you might think that this is a bad idea. However, if we open the DevTools, we can see that our state is not preserved in that global variable, however, in this provider scope. So if we look at this provider scope, let me zoom in. Okay, if we look at the provider scope, we can see that it has various provider, this future provider, the list of categories, this API service, and this state provider with integer that we provided number of questions, processing, or some other things that we have provided. So all the provided values or actual state is saved in our provider scope, and this is easily viewable. We can easily view these things in the DevTools, so that we can view our state, inspect our state in our wizard tree. It is available in the DevTools, so that we can properly view the values and its methods. So we can use DevTools to inspect our state and see what providers have been provided in our scope. This is all for this episode. See you again in the next episode, where we will conclude this series by converting whole application in such a way that we'll not be passing data from one page to another using arguments or view models, but rather use provider to share data across application. Thank you. See you again in the next episode.